Hey guys, how is everybody doing? Ghostbusters Frozen Empire is now officially in theaters right now as of recording this video. So, leading up to it, here are my thoughts on its predecessor, Ghostbusters Afterlife. My little story with Afterlife. Back when this movie was coming out, this was the first official sequel to those original Ghostbusters movies. Well, sure, we have Ghostbusters 2, but this was the one that I finally got to watch in theaters. That was a continuation of that original film, and I was so excited. And what interested me the most was that Jason Reitman, who is the son of Ivan Reitman, rest in peace, he is the son of Ivan Reitman, and so he would be taking over directing duties and writing duties for Ghostbusters. And that on the wall just says that this movie is going to be good, because if you get the son of the original Ghostbusters director taking on a new generation of Ghostbusters and taking on his own new take on this movie, that just shows that this movie is going to be very special, in which it is. And back when this movie first came out, I absolutely adored it. I thought it was a great continuation of the original movie, and I could not wait to see where they would go with this. I was really excited to see if they would go with this movie. But watching it 2 years later, have my thoughts changed? Or do I love this movie still? Or do I like it? Or do I think this is just not it just is just another Ghostbusters movie that just kind of is mediocre or it sucks? Let's find out. I'm gonna go with my positives on Ghostbusters Afterlife. Is something that I really like seeing about this movie, especially since Harold Ramis passed away years ago, is that we get to see a new generation of the Spangler family. We get to see his daughter, we get to see his grandchildren with Finn Wolfhard and Phoebe of this movie, which I think they're all great. I think they're a great addition, especially since you have Harold Ramis gone, and if you're gonna do a sequel to Ghostbusters and Harold Ramis is no longer with us, so we're not going to be able to have an Egon Spangler. They do a terrific job of bringing in a whole new generation of Egons, to where you get you get his granddaughter, his grandson, and his daughter, which we've never even heard about until this movie. And I think they're all great in this, and I love Phoebe in this movie, and I'll talk about more about her as we go on. I think they're all great in this movie. I think they carry on Harold Ramis's legacy with them. I think they do a good job of respecting his legacy and respecting the Egon character. I love what they do with the family in this movie. I think they're all likable. I think they're all loving, and most of them, all of them, have time to shine as well, except for one, which I'll get to. I think it was great seeing a new generation of Egons in this movie. It was great to see them. I love the addition of Phoebe, who's going to be kind of like the new protagonist of this entire franchise, which I'm very excited to see where they'll go with that in the new one, but either way, they were all a great inclusion. What I love about this movie is the dynamic between Phoebe and Podcast, which is Podcast, who is a character I really like and is like this weird character that like makes podcasts for a living. Who would want to make stuff for the internet? Anyways, Phoebe and Peters, God, Phoebe's and Podcast's dynamic in this movie is great. I think the two actors and actresses have great chemistry. They're both funny in this movie. I love their dynamic, how they're working together, like when they're working on the proton pack for the first time.
That is the best thing I've ever seen.
And when they're firing it, they're destroying this car. Podcast is amazed. Phoebe's just like, so be it. Their dynamic in this movie was hilarious. I love them. They were by far the funniest part of the movie as well. I thought they were great in this movie. They had good dynamic, a good chemistry, and every time they were on screen, bickering with one another and talking with each other, it was just fun. Especially the first time when they meet and Phoebe tells him like a really dumb joke. What was it? It was like, what do you call like a dead polar bear? And she said like anything because it can't hear you, which is a dark joke. But like that, when they first meet, you could tell that they're gonna be great in this movie, and throughout the entire movie, they were just fantastic. Conclusion of this franchise, and a new character and a new actor that I really like is Paul Rudd. Paul Rudd is one of my favorite actors of all time. The guy can do any role. Either he's playing Ant-Man, he's playing a comedic role with Seth Rogen. He's always great. And something that I love about his inclusion in this movie, because one of the original ideas for Ghostbusters 3 was going to be a passing of the torch, kind of what the remake was kind of suggesting at first, but nope, that's just a full blown remake. But this movie, it was the original idea for Ghostbusters 3 was going to be a passing of the torch film, and the new actors were going to be Seth Rogen, Paul Rudd, and that whole crew of new comedics of the modern era. And so Paul Rudd was originally going to be a new Ghostbusters in the third one. So I thought it was nice to see him actually come into this franchise and actually have an inclusion of this movie. I thought that was great, especially when you hear that legacy and then you finally get to see him into a Ghostbusters movie. He's funny in this movie to where he's like the teacher for summer school. He's ends up dating Phoebe's mom throughout this entire movie. He's hilarious in this movie, as Paul Rudd should be. He's great in any role that he's in, if you ask me.
Hey,
And his inclusion in this movie, it never felt out of place. I never thought that he was unfunny. Every time he was on screen, he went full Paul Rudd. He just had an absolute blast on screen. He was great in this movie. I'm very excited to see what they do with him in the new one. He was great in this movie. He was funny as hell. I thought his dynamic with Phoebe and the kids was great, and I thought it was kind of cool how he started dating Phoebe's mom, which is pretty generic, and it doesn't really go anywhere until the end, and how he kind of becomes like the new keymaster, which is pretty funny. Paul Rudd, he never felt out of place in this movie, and he was just hilarious. Speaking of funny elements, the comedy in this movie is just fantastic. It's funny as hell to where I don't think it's as funny as the first movie in any way, shape, or form, but this is right up against it with funniest because this movie is just fun, especially Phoebe, who kind of has like that. It reminded me a lot of like young Sheldon ish in a way, to where her like smart aleck comedy, like her jokes, kind of to where she makes chemistry jokes, how she's like a genius, she's a scientist, she knows how to do all this stuff with like the Ghostbusters, and she makes like pretty funny joke with like chemistry with Paul Rudd in this movie, which I thought was hilarious, kind of because it just reminded me a lot of young Sheldon when it came with her character. And of course, I already talked about Paul Rudd. Paul Rudd, his comedy, it was great. He was fantastic in this movie every time he was on screen, especially with the Walmart scene. I like that part when he's in it. Yeah, the comedy in this movie is just great. Especially like I when I talked about Phoebe and Podcast together, those two, they were by far the funniest of this movie. Where they're together, that stuff was really funny. It was just great. I was glad to finally watch a Ghostbusters movie that was actually really funny again. Something that about this movie that I really loved and something that I really appreciate, this Ghostbusters movie probably has the most love put into it because I talked about Harold Ramis passing away, but you can definitely tell that the filmmakers and the writer and the director of this movie really was paying tribute to Harold Ramis, and this one just has the most heart. And I'm not afraid to admit that at the end of this movie, I kind of teared up a little bit because the way they pay respect to Harold Ramis at the end of this movie, the way they they bring him back to this franchise in a way, it just showed love. Like it never felt disrespectful. Like at the end of this movie, where he shows up and he's a ghost and he's helping his family defeat the bad guy or the villain or whatever. And like you see that, and then everybody apologizes to him. Everybody says that they should have called him. They should have been different. Like stuff like that. It was sad, and it you could tell there's a lot of love because there's a lot of movies today to where they do like this disrespectful thing to where they forcefully CGI a actor into a movie just to show that they're there because they passed away years ago, so they have to forcefully put them in there in a way. But this one, you can tell that it just didn't feel wrong. Like it felt right because the people behind the camera and in front of the camera were okay with it. I imagine Harold Ramis's own family would be okay with it because they paid great tribute to him, and it's very loving. And just like again, this one just felt like the a lot of love put into it because like you get scenes like Phoebe going around and she's learning about her grandfather, like stuff like that. It just felt it had the most heart put into it. It felt like the most love in this movie, and I could not help but just love that. It was great. It made me feel joyful inside. It was making me happy the entire time I was watching it. great. And I never felt like upset or angry about anything when they were doing anything. I just couldn't help but just feel happy and just feel love from this film. Something that I thought was really interesting about this movie, and something that I didn't really expect, and how timeless this movie feels, because this movie is set in modern day. This movie is set in 2021 when the year it came out. It didn't feel like that. It felt timeless. It felt because they go to Somerville, what I believe the small town was called, and there was never characters where they were on their iPhones or tablets or anything like that, or like especially Finn Wolfhard, who's like an 18-year-old. He's playing an 18-year-old in this movie. He didn't feel like a teenager because he's not on his phone. He's not doing all of this stuff. He's doing stuff that kids in the 80s were doing. That is what I love about this movie, because the entire time I was watching this, I was like, this just feels like a good old 80s movie, because you got like this diner with people giving people's orders on rollerblades, and how Finn Wolfhard goes over to this diner and gets a job there to get closer to a girl, which people would do in the 80s, and they do that in other 80s movies. And like how they live on this farm, and Phoebe is like trying to keep herself entertained, not on her phone much, but yeah, sure, they are on their tablets on their computers every now and then to look up the videos for Ghostbusters. But something about this movie, it just didn't feel like it was in the modern era. It felt like it was just in the 80s. I don't know if that was trying to play a nostalgic feel for people watching this movie. I don't know if it was just on accident, but the entire time I was watching this, I was like, this feels like a good old 80s comedy classic to me. Like that original Ghostbusters movie. That's something I can't help but put like respect into this film. I don't know if it was on accident, but if it was on accident, then it was a happy accident. Like children. Of course, you can't talk about this movie without talking about seeing the OG Ghostbusters come back.
Hey, Flat Top! Have you missed us?
Because you got Venkman, you got Ray, and you got Winston. They all came back, and for this movie, sure, advertisements spoiled that when it first came out, but we were Ghostbusters fans, but we wanted to see it. And it was great to see them, especially Ray when we first see him, when Phoebe calls him when she's in jail, like that whole scene, that was great. I love seeing that, especially the little young me back in 2021. I was in the theater, so excited when he showed up. I was like, yes! Like, I was so excited when he showed up on screen, and then when Bill Murray and the guy who plays Winston came back, all these guys coming back, I love seeing them. It was great. They're not in the movie much, which is okay with me. I'm fine with it because it's not their story. We didn't come to watch them, we came to watch a new Ghostbusters movie. But if you're gonna put the originals in there, then that's gonna be great. But yeah, I'm glad that they're not in the movie too much, because I don't want them to steal the spotlight from the other new characters. But seeing them show up at the final battle when they're taking down the villain, I thought that was a great moment, especially for everyone who's a Ghostbusters fan. You also got Sigourney Weaver in a post-credits scene after the credits, kinda before the final end credits. She gets like a little cameo, and they do like the OG tester thing at the in the first movie where they're showing cards. Like, okay, what's this card? I like seeing her do that. That was a lot of fun. That whole little scene kind of was really funny. Yeah, it was just great seeing all the other OG characters and cast members come back for this movie. It was just great to see them again. Something about this movie, which is my final positive. I have seen some complaints about this movie may use too much nostalgia for audiences, but I would disagree. I honestly feel this movie does a good job of blending nostalgia and new, because sure, you have your nostalgia elements like bringing back the OGs and showing off stuff from the original, doing stuff like from the original. Sure, you got that, and then you got Stay Puft Marshmallow Man coming back. You got the same villain at the end of the first Ghostbusters come back. You got the Keymaster and the Gatekeeper. Sure, those are definitely all nostalgia moments for Ghostbusters fan, but they also bring in some new stuff like new ghosts, new elements, new characters. I felt they did a great job of blending the original movie with with these new characters. It was such a fun time with that. I've seen people say they didn't like that they used too many nostalgia elements, but I would disagree. I feel they just blend them well with the new and the old. That's my mixed elements, and this is something I still don't know how to feel, but at the same time, I kind of understand why they did it. I honestly feel this movie kind of focuses too much on kids in a way, to where sure, Ghostbusters is now more of like a family-friendly kid franchise now, but this movie I feel kind of focuses too much on kind of on children, kind of, to where I kind of miss some of those adult elements of the original two movies, kind of, to where there's not like a lot of adult imagery, comedy in this movie. It's more aimed towards kids. But at the same time, I understand why, because Ghostbusters has become more of a family franchise. This movie has been introduced to more kids now, and but I feel there's also kind of enough adult stuff in there. But I feel instead of giving us adult comedy in this movie, they just gave us nostalgia stuff. It's like, oh, we're not gonna give you adult humor, but we'll give you nostalgia. That works. I just honestly feel there could have been more adult humor in this movie to appease to the adults, but also having enough there for the kids. I would have preferred that, but the final product that we did get, where it was focusing more on kids, I'm fine with it because this is more of a kid franchise now. But I still wish there was more of that adult imagery in this movie. Moving on to my negatives, and this is more of a nitpick, if anything, because that never really bothered me the entire time I was watching it, but this is something they introduce and they don't really go anywhere with it. And that's like the whole Finn Wolfhard situation. I'm kind of glad he takes a step back because this was at the point where he's like a huge name in Hollywood because of Stranger Things and the It franchise, kind of. And because of that fame and all that, you kind of expect he would be in front of line of the entire movie, but no, he really isn't. He takes a step back. But at the same time, they introduced this whole thing with this movie to where he has this crush on this girl in Somerville, and then he starts to work at this restaurant that she works at to get closer to her. He tries to make some moves with her. He ends up being the one that fixes the car of the Ghostbusters, and he gets arrested and he's driving the car the entire movie. But they introduced this whole relationship stuff with Finn Wolfhard, where it doesn't really go anywhere. They introduce it, they do some things with it, but they don't really do anything. But again, it's more of a nitpick. I'm kind of glad Finn Wolfhard took a step back. I'm kind of hoping Frozen Empire will kind of fix this issue for me, to where they kind of develop more of that relationship in the next one. But I wouldn't be surprised if they didn't. But I'm glad again, I'm glad he takes a back seat in this movie. But I wish they paid off that whole subplot going on, because the entire time I was watching it, I was like, well, you introduced this, but you're not going anywhere with it. All in all, guys, Afterlife is one of the best sequels ever made, in my opinion. It's a great sequel. It has the most love put into it. This is by far the best Ghostbusters movie since the original. Not as good as the original. I don't think there ever will be a Ghostbusters movie close to the original. But if you're a fan of that original movie, definitely give this one a shot. If you weren't a fan of the second movie, then you need to check this one out because it's a fun time. Get the entire family together to watch this movie. It's a great time. You and your family will love it. It's a damn good time, and it's a worthy sequel to that original 1984 classic. What do you guys think about Ghostbusters Afterlife? Have you seen it? What do you think about it? Do you like this movie? Do you not like this movie? Do you think it's better than the original? Do you think the remake is better than this movie? Let me know in the comments below and we shall talk about it. And if you like this video, like it. If you loved it, subscribe, hit the bell notification so you will get notified for all of my latest videos. But of course, until next time, we'll see you all next time. That didn't make sense.